My family left my daughter in a hot car hours later. They faced the consequences. My name is Bridget, and I am a 32-year-old insurance adjuster living in the sweltering heat of Austin, Texas. My daughter, Daisy, was only 6. They left her in a locked car, in the 106-degree heat, for 3 agonizing hours. When I finally found out and confronted them, asking how they could be so heartless, they didn't apologize. They laughed. They told me they just needed a break from her constant whining. I didn't scream. I didn't waste my breath arguing with people who valued a steak dinner over a child's life. Instead, I picked up my phone and called someone else. I made one choice that afternoon, and just a few hours later, their comfortable, entitled world started collapsing in ways they never saw coming. They thought they could treat my daughter like an inconvenience and get away with it. They were wrong. This story is a harsh reminder that toxic family members can be the most dangerous people in your life. Before we get into how I dismantled their lives piece by piece, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single moment of this reckoning. The Street Jude sign at Dell Children's Medical Center blurred into a streak of red and white as I swung my car into the emergency bay, the humid Austin air hitting me like a physical blow the moment I stepped out. I didn't even wait for the valet, tossing my keys to a startled attendant and sprinting toward the sliding glass doors. Inside, the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low hum of heavy machinery felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the oppressive 106-degree heat I had just escaped. Every second felt like an hour as I approached the heavy oak desk of the reception. I managed to choke out my daughter's name, Daisy Sterling, my voice sounding like gravel under a boot. The nurse behind the counter didn't offer a polite smile. She offered a look of profound, heavy pity that made my stomach drop into my shoes. She pointed me toward a private waiting area, but I was already moving before she finished the sentence. As I hurried down the hallway, my mind involuntarily flashed back to that morning. It had been a Saturday, the kind where the Texas sun turns the pavement into a griddle by 10 o'clock. My sister, Cassandra Nelson, had shown up at my doorstep with our parents in tow, looking radiant in a designer sundress. They were headed to a high-end French bistro downtown to celebrate my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Cassandra's own car, an old sedan with a flickering engine light, wasn't prestigious enough for the occasion, or so she claimed. She begged to borrow my brand-new black SUV, the one with the premium leather interior and the advanced climate control system I had worked 6 months of overtime to afford. "It's a special day, Bridget," my mother had pleaded, smoothing her hair. "Let's just enjoy it as a family." I had agreed on the condition that they take Daisy with them, since Simon was out of town on a business trip, and I had a mandatory weekend shift at the insurance firm. I thought she would be safe. I thought they loved her. I reached the double doors of the pediatric intensive care unit just as a tall man in a white coat stepped out. He introduced himself as Dr. Eris, but I could barely register his name over the roaring in my ears. He led me to a small glass-walled room where my 6-year-old lay dwarfed by a mountain of white sheets and tangled wires. Daisy's skin, usually a healthy olive tone, was a terrifying shade of waxy crimson. A cooling blanket was draped over her small frame, and the rhythmic hiss of an oxygen mask filled the silence. "Doctor," Eris spoke in a low, measured tone, explaining that when the paramedics found her, her internal body temperature had spiked to a lethal 105 degrees. She was suffering from severe heat stroke, acute dehydration, and was drifting in and out of a delirious state. "A few more minutes, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice tightening with a flicker of professional anger, "and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Children's bodies heat up 3 to 5 times faster than adults. That car became an oven." The weight of his words felt like a physical crushing force on my chest. While I was sitting in my air-conditioned office reviewing flood claims, my daughter had been baking in a light-proof metal box. I reached out to touch her hand, but it felt unnaturally hot, even through the cooling pads. Rage, cold and sharp, began to replace the initial paralyzing fear. I needed to know how this happened. How do 3 grown adults, my own flesh and blood, forget a living, breathing child in the backseat of a car they don't even own? I stepped out of the room to find a man in a crisp blue uniform waiting by the nurse's station. He introduced himself as Officer Miller, the responding deputy who had been called to the scene. He looked at me with a mix of duty and reality, holding a digital tablet with several photos already pulled up. He explained that a passerby had heard faint thumping sounds coming from my SUV, which was parked in the far corner of the restaurant's unshaded lot. The windows were rolled up tight. The engine was off. Daisy had been found huddled on the floorboard behind the driver's seat, trying to escape the direct sunlight hitting the leather. The restaurant staff said the party of 3 had been inside for a little over 3 hours, Miller stated, his eyes narrowing. They were midway through their main course when we located them. Your sister, Cassandra, was the one holding the keys. I felt a bile-like bitterness rise in my throat. 3 hours. They had spent 180 minutes sipping wine and discussing my sister's upcoming real estate exam, while my daughter's organs were beginning to shut down just a few hundred yards away. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers trembling so violently I almost dropped it. I had 17 missed calls from my mother, but I ignored those. I scrolled directly to Cassandra's name. I didn't want an explanation from my parents. I wanted to hear it from the person who had been behind the wheel of my car. When the line finally clicked open, I didn't hear sobbing or frantic apologies. Instead, the background was filled with the clinking of silverware and the upbeat hum of a bistro playlist. Bridget? God! Finally, Cassandra's voice came through, sounding annoyed rather than distraught. Where are you? The police took your car keys and we're stuck here waiting for a ride. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? The manager actually asked us to leave because of the commotion outside. It's Mom and Dad's anniversary, and you're letting this drama ruin everything. I stood there in the quiet hospital hallway, staring at a poster about childhood vaccinations, unable to comprehend the sheer, narcissistic void on the other end of the line. She wasn't worried about the niece she had nearly killed. She was worried about the embarrassment of a police intervention during her fancy lunch. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. My daughter was fighting for her life 10 feet away from me, and my sister was complaining about a ruined dessert. The shift inside me was instantaneous. The sister who used to share my secrets was gone, replaced by a stranger I no longer recognized. I didn't yell. I didn't give her the satisfaction of my tears. I simply looked at Officer Miller, who was watching me intently, and I made a silent vow. This wasn't going to be a family mishap that we laughed about at Christmas. This was the beginning of the end for all of them. The silence of the hospital corridor felt like a vacuum, sucking the air out of my lungs as I gripped my phone, Cassandra's dismissive words still echoing in my ear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have the strength to scream at a void that had no bottom. I simply hung up. The screen of my iPhone smudged with a mix of sweat and the sterile residue of the hospital walls. Officer Miller was still standing a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with a sharp, professional focus. He had clearly heard enough of my sister's screeching through the speaker to understand exactly what kind of dynamic he was dealing with. I turned back toward the glass window of the PICU, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of Daisy's chest, the plastic tubes looking far too thick for her tiny neck. Less than 20 minutes later, the heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open with a violence that didn't belong in a place of healing. I heard my mother's voice before I saw her, a high-pitched, frantic vibrato that she usually reserved for when the dry cleaners ruined one of her silk blouses. Evelyn Nelson marched down the hallway, her floral dress fluttering, followed closely by my father, Arthur, who looked more annoyed about the humidity than the fact that his granddaughter was currently hooked to an EKG machine. Bringing up the rear was Cassandra, her mascara perfectly intact, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a shield. She wasn't running, she was power walking, looking left and right to see if anyone was watching the spectacle she felt forced to participate in. "Bridget, thank God!" my mother cried out, reaching to grab my shoulders, but I stepped back, letting her hands fall into empty air. She didn't seem to notice the rejection. "Do you have any idea what that policeman did? He humiliated us in front of the entire restaurant. People were staring, whispering. The manager practically shoved the check into your father's hand and told us to leave through the back exit. It was our anniversary dinner, Bridget. 40 years of marriage, ruined by a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? The words felt like shards of glass in my mouth. I pointed toward the glass window where Daisy lay. She was in a 106-degree car for over 3 hours, Mom. Her internal temperature hit 105. The doctor said her organs were literally starting to cook. And you're worried about the seating chart at a bistro? Arthur sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a gesture of profound exhaustion. Now, don't start with the theatrics, Bridget. We know it's hot, it's Texas in August, for heaven's sake. But the girl was being impossible. She wouldn't stop whining about the heat the moment we left the house. She was ruining the mood, complaining about her dress, complaining about the drive. Cassandra suggested she just stay in the car for a timeout while we had our appetizers. We thought she'd just fall asleep. We left the windows cracked a tiny bit, or at least we meant to. You meant to? I turned my gaze to Cassandra, who was busy inspecting a chipped nail. You had the keys, Cassandra. It was my car. You know the safety features. You know how fast black leather absorbs heat. You left a 6-year-old child in an oven so you could eat escargot in peace? Cassandra finally looked up, her eyes cold and devoid of any maternal instinct or familial empathy. Oh, please. Daisy is fine. Look at her. She's just sleeping. You've always been such a helicopter parent, Bridget. It's exhausting for everyone else. We just wanted 1 hour of adult conversation without her constant questions and fidgeting. If you hadn't been so busy with your insurance files and actually came to the dinner like a good daughter, this wouldn't have happened. You're the one who dumped her on us. The sheer, calculated cruelty of her statement made my vision go white for a split second. She wasn't just deflective, she was predatory, twisting the situation to make me the villain for having a job that paid for the very car she had used as a cage. I looked at my parents, expecting a reprimand, a flicker of shame, anything. Instead, my mother nodded in agreement with Cassandra. She has a point, dear, Evelyn said, her voice dropping into that patronizing tone she used when she wanted me to concede. You've become very distant lately, always working, always talking about budgets and responsibilities. It makes us feel like we're a burden. We just wanted a nice family afternoon. If Daisy had just behaved, we would have been back in the car in 20 minutes. It's not our fault the service was slow and the waiter took forever with the wine list. We didn't deliberately do anything. We just lost track of time. 180 minutes? I whispered, the number feeling like a weight. You lost track of 3 hours while your granddaughter was suffocating. Officer Miller stepped forward then, his presence casting a long, intimidating shadow over my family. I'm going to need all of you to step into the consultation room, he said, his voice like iron. I've already taken the statements from the restaurant staff and the witnesses who found the child. Now, I suggest you start being very honest about who made the decision to lock that door. My father straightened his back, trying to summon the authority he used to have when I was a child. Now see here, officer. This is a private family matter. We've already had enough drama for 1 day. We're happy to pay whatever fine is necessary for the infraction, but let's not make this more than it is. My daughter Cassandra is a respected member of the community. She's about to get her real estate license. We don't need a paper trail for a simple mistake. The way they spoke about Daisy as if she were a minor traffic ticket or a broken vase was the final straw. I realized then that I wasn't dealing with people who made a mistake. I was dealing with people who didn't view my daughter as a human being. To them, she was an accessory, an inconvenience, or a tool for their own comfort. I looked at my mother's expensive jewelry, my father's smug entitlement, and Cassandra's icy indifference. I felt a strange, chilling calm settle over me. The bridge wasn't just burning. I was the one holding the match, and I was ready to watch the whole structure turn to ash. The monitor in Daisy's room emitted a rhythmic, hollow chirp that seemed to sync with the throbbing in my temples. It was past midnight, and the frantic energy of the emergency room had settled into a heavy, artificial stillness. Daisy had finally drifted into a natural sleep, her small fingers still clutching the edge of my sleeve as if she feared I'd vanish the moment she let go. Earlier, she had woken up for a few minutes, her voice a dry, papery whisper as she asked why the car wouldn't open and why Auntie Cassandra hadn't heard her screaming. Those words were like hot lead poured into my soul. My 6-year-old had spent her final moments of consciousness believing she was invisible to the people who were supposed to be her guardians. I stepped out into the hallway to get a cup of water, my legs feeling like leaden weights. I didn't get 5 steps before my mother intercepted me. Evelyn didn't look like a woman who had spent the evening grieving or praying. She had touched up her lipstick, and her expression was one of sharp, calculating focus. She led me toward a secluded alcove near the vending machines where my father and Cassandra were waiting. The air in the small space felt thick with an agenda I wasn't ready to hear. "Bridget, honey," my mother began, her voice dripping with a forced, sugary concern that made my skin crawl. "We've been talking about the police and the investigation. Officer Miller mentioned that since the SUV is registered in your name, there's a way to simplify the narrative, to make this look like a tragic lapse in judgment by the primary caregiver." I stared at her, the water cup trembling slightly in my hand. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Arthur cleared his throat, stepping forward with the air of a man closing a business deal. "Look at the facts, Bridget. You're successful. You have a stable career as a senior adjuster. You have a clean record and a husband who provides a second income. If this goes on Cassandra's permanent record, she's finished. The Texas Real Estate Commission is incredibly strict about moral turpitude or any kind of child endangerment charges. She'll never get her license. All those years of study, all that money we invested in her courses, it would be flushed down the drain." "And your point is?" I asked, my voice dangerously flat. Cassandra stepped toward me, her eyes brimming with crocodile tears. "Bridget, please! You weren't there! If we tell them that you were the one who drove us to the restaurant, that you were distracted by a work call and simply forgot to check the back before heading inside to meet us, it's just a fine, maybe some community service. With your reputation, the judge would go easy on you. But for me, it's a death sentence for my career. I'm just starting my life. You already have everything." The audacity of the request was so profound it felt surreal. They weren't asking for a favor. They were asking me to commit perjury, to admit to nearly killing my own child, all to protect the professional aspirations of the woman who had actually done it. They wanted me to carry the stigma of being a negligent mother so that Cassandra could sell luxury condos in West Austin. "You want me to tell the police I left Daisy in that car?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You want me to go on record saying I abandoned my daughter in a 106-degree oven?" "It's just paperwork, Bridget," Cassandra snapped, her mask of sorrow slipping for a second. "Don't be so dramatic. Daisy is going to be fine. The doctors said so. Why should 2 lives be ruined over one mistake? You're the responsible sister. You've always been the one to fix things for the family. This is just one more thing. We'll help you pay the fines. We'll even take care of Daisy for a few weekends so you can recover." I looked at my father, expecting some shred of paternal protection. Instead, he just checked his watch. "Your mother and I have already drafted a statement. We'll tell the police we were confused in our initial shock, that we thought Cassandra had the keys when really you had them the whole time. It's a small lie, Bridget, a white lie to save your sister's future." In that moment, the last flickering candle of loyalty I held for them was they didn't care about Daisy's trauma. They didn't care about the night terrors she would undoubtedly have for years. They only cared about the Nelson name and the potential commission checks Cassandra might bring in. "No," I said. It was a small word, but it felt like a mountain. My mother's face twisted, the mask of the loving grandmother shattering. "No? After everything we've done for you? After the way we've supported your career and tolerated your husband? You're going to be this selfish? You're going to destroy your sister's life out of spite?" "I'm not destroying anything, Mom," I replied, my voice gaining a cold, crystalline clarity. Cassandra destroyed her own life the moment she turned off that engine and walked away from a crying child. And you destroyed yours the moment you decided that her career was worth more than my daughter's heartbeat? You're being hysterical, Arthur growled. Think about the family, Bridget. Think about how this looks in the community. I am thinking about my family, I said, glancing back toward the PICU where Simon was now sitting by Daisy's bed, having just arrived from the airport. My family is in that room. You three? You're just people I used to know. I turned my back on them, ignoring my mother's muffled shrieks of ungrateful and Cassandra's desperate pleas. I walked back into Daisy's room, sat down next to Simon, and felt the first true wave of resolve wash over me. They wanted a story for the police? I was going to give them one. But it wouldn't be the lie they drafted. It would be the absolute, documented truth. And I had a secret weapon they didn't even know existed. The hospital parking lot was a vast, shimmering sea of asphalt, still radiating the residual heat of the Texas afternoon even as the moon climbed higher into the sky. I left Simon by Daisy's bedside, promising to return with a fresh change of clothes and her favorite stuffed rabbit. But my real mission was far more clinical. My SUV, the black obsidian cage that had nearly become my daughter's tomb, had been towed back to the impound lot adjacent to the police station for safekeeping earlier that evening. Using my spare key and my insurance credentials, I managed to gain access to the vehicle. The interior still smelled faintly of the expensive lavender perfume my mother favored, a scent that now made my throat tighten with a nauseating bile. I sat in the driver's seat, the silence of the cabin wrapping around me like a shroud. My fingers fumbled as I reached for the hidden SD card slot tucked behind the rearview mirror. This car wasn't just a luxury purchase. It was a fortress of modern technology, equipped with a high-definition, 360-degree dashcam system that recorded everything, not just when the engine was running, but whenever the motion sensors were triggered. My family didn't know about the sentry mode I had activated just weeks prior after a minor hit-and-run in a grocery store parking lot. They thought they were alone in that car. They thought their secrets were safe within these leather walls. I plugged the card into my laptop, the blue light of the screen illuminating the dark interior of the SUV. The footage started at 12:45 p.m. I watched the screen, my breath hitching in my chest as the vehicle pulled into the unshaded lot of the bistro. The sun was a white, hot orb in the sky. I saw Cassandra step out first, adjusting her sunglasses and smoothing her dress. Then came my father and mother, laughing about a joke Arthur had just told. They looked like a picture-perfect family out for a celebratory brunch. Then, the audio kicked in. I heard Daisy's small, tentative voice from the back seat. "Mommy said we're going to eat now?" "It's too hot, Auntie Cassandra. Can I come inside?" Cassandra didn't even turn around. "Stop it, Daisy. You've been complaining since we left the driveway. You're sweaty and you're going to make a scene in a nice restaurant. Just sit there and cool off. We'll bring you a treat if you're good." "But the air is off," Daisy whimpered. I watched as Cassandra reached over and deliberately turned the ignition off, cutting the climate control. "It's just for a few minutes," my mother's voice chirped from the passenger seat. "It'll save Bridget some gas. Don't be a spoiled brat, Daisy. Just close your eyes and take a nap. We're going to have a glass of wine and then we'll come get you." The heavy thud of the doors closing echoed through my laptop speakers like a gunshot. I watched the three of them walk toward the restaurant, never once looking back. I fast-forwarded the footage, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I watched my daughter's face through the internal cabin camera. I watched her struggle with the door handles, which were child-locked from the driver's console, another safety feature Cassandra had failed to disengage. I watched as Daisy began to panic, her small hands drumming against the glass, her face turning a deep, terrifying shade of plum. She wasn't just whining, she was fighting for air in a space that had reached 130 degrees within 15 minutes. At the 1-hour mark, the footage showed Cassandra returning to the car. My heart leaped. I thought she was coming to save her. But she didn't open the door. She reached into the front seat through a slightly cracked window to grab her lipstick from the glove box. She looked directly at Daisy, who was slumped against the window, barely conscious. Cassandra didn't scream. She didn't call 911. She simply sighed, rolled her eyes at the drama, and walked back to the restaurant to finish her main course. I closed the laptop, the darkness of the SUV feeling heavier than ever. My hands weren't trembling anymore. They were cold, steady, and ready for war. I drove back to the hospital, but I didn't go to Daisy's room. Instead, I waited in the lobby for Detective Sarah Vance, the woman Officer Miller had mentioned would be taking over the criminal side of the investigation. Detective Vance arrived 20 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman in a charcoal suit who looked like she had seen every version of human cruelty imaginable. We sat in a small, windowless interview room. I didn't offer her a narrative or a tearful plea. I simply pushed the laptop across the table and hit play. We sat in silence for the next 10 minutes, the only sound being the recorded cries of my daughter and the distant clinking of silverware from the bistro background. When the video reached the point where Cassandra ignored a dying child to grab her makeup, Detective Vance's jaw tightened so hard I heard the bone click. She paused the video and looked at me, her eyes reflecting a grim, professional fire. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Your family gave us a statement an hour ago. They claimed it was a tragic accident, that they thought you had the keys and were right behind them. They said they only realized she was missing when the police arrived." "They lied," I said, the words feeling like a final sentence. "They sat there for 3 hours knowing she was in that car. They looked her in the eye while she was suffocating and they went back for dessert." Vance nodded, closing the laptop and tucking it under her arm. "This isn't just negligence anymore. This is injury to a child, with a failure to render aid enhancement. In the state of Texas, with this video evidence, that's a second-degree felony. I'm going to need a formal copy of this file, and I need you to stay away from them. Do not answer their calls. Do not tell them what we have." "I have no intention of speaking to them," I replied. "I'm done talking. From here on out, I'm only interested in the consequences." As I walked out of that room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, replaced by a razor-sharp clarity. My parents wanted to protect Cassandra's career? They wanted to keep their comfortable lifestyle funded by my good daughter guilt? They had no idea that the very technology I had paid for was about to dismantle their lives, piece by excruciating piece. The war had officially begun, and I was the only one who knew the opening moves. The following Monday, the sun rose over Austin with the same relentless glare, but the atmosphere inside our home had shifted from frantic grief to a chilling, calculated silence. Daisy was back from the hospital, resting in her room under Simon's watchful eye, her small body still recovering from the trauma. I, however, wasn't resting. I sat at my mahogany desk, the glow of 2 monitors illuminating my face as I logged into every financial portal I owned. For years, I had been the silent engine keeping the Nelson family afloat. I had paid for my parents' health insurance, their country club memberships, and even the recurring lease on the townhouse they called home. I had done it out of a misplaced sense of duty, a debt I thought I owed for being the successful child. That debt was now paid in full, signed in my daughter's blood. My first move was the primary credit card account. I pulled up the secondary users list and with 3 deliberate clicks, deactivated the cards held by Evelyn and Arthur Nelson. I watched the status change from active to canceled with a grim sense of satisfaction. They were currently at a high-end boutique in the domain, likely trying to buy sympathy gifts for Daisy on my dime. Next, I navigated to my insurance portal. I removed my parents from my premium family plan, effective immediately. If they wanted coverage, they could find it themselves on the open market. Finally, I sent a formal notice to the landlord of their townhouse, stating that as of the end of this month, I would no longer be the guarantor or the source of the monthly rent payments of $3,500. Then, there was the matter of my SUV. After Detective Vance had finished with the forensic download of the dashcam footage, the vehicle had been released back to me. However, Cassandra still had the physical keys, and according to a smug text she had sent Simon earlier, she was currently using it to drive to a celebratory brunch with her real estate classmates, convinced that the police matter would just blow over. She truly believed that because I was family, I would eventually cave and hand over the lie she needed. I didn't call her. Instead, I called a private repossession company I had worked with through my insurance firm. I have a vehicle registered in my name that is currently being operated by an unauthorized driver, I told the dispatcher, providing the GPS coordinates from my car's mobile app. I need it towed to my home address immediately. I have the title in hand, and I will be waiting with the police if necessary. The response was swift. Less than 45 minutes later, my phone erupted with notifications. It started with my mother. I didn't answer. Then my father. I let it go to voicemail. Finally, the screen flashed with Cassandra's name. I waited until the third consecutive call before I slid the bar to answer. I didn't say hello. Bridget! What the hell is going on? Cassandra's voice was a jagged shriek, the sound of someone whose carefully constructed reality was shattering. I was in the middle of the parking lot at the Westlake Country Club, and two men just hooked your SUV to a tow truck. They did it right in front of everyone. They told me I wasn't an authorized driver and that if I didn't step away, they'd call the sheriff. I had to stand there like a criminal while they hauled it off. Where am I supposed to go? I have a mock exam in an hour. You can walk. Cassandra, I said, my voice as flat and cold as a tombstone, or you can call an Uber. But you aren't spending another second in a car I paid for. Not after what you did in that back seat. Are you insane? She hissed. It was an accident. Mom said you were going to help. And speaking of Mom, she just tried to pay for her lunch and her card was declined. She's humiliated, Bridget. She's crying in the middle of a restaurant because her own daughter is playing some sick power game. It's not a game, I replied. It's a divorce. I'm divorcing this entire family. I've canceled the cards, I've stopped the rent payments, I've removed the insurance. You wanted to treat my daughter like an inconvenience? Well, now you're going to find out what it's like to be an inconvenience to me. You have 24 days to find a new place for Mom and Dad to live, because I'm done being their bank. You can't do this! My father's voice suddenly boomed in the background. He must have snatched the phone from Cassandra. We are your parents, Bridget. We raised you. We gave you everything. You think you can just cut us off because of one bad afternoon? We'll take you to court. We'll tell everyone what a cold-hearted, vindictive person you've become. Go ahead, Dad, I said, a small, dark smile touching my lips. Tell the world. Tell them how you watched your granddaughter suffocate while you waited for your appetizers. Tell them why the police have a video of Cassandra checking her lipstick while Daisy was unconscious in the back. And as for court, I'd love to see you there. But you might want to save your money for a lawyer, because Detective Vance is currently filing the felony warrants. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The bravado vanished, replaced by a suffocating, panicked silence. They didn't know about the video. They thought it was just my word against theirs. They thought they could gaslight me into submission like they had done my entire life. Bridget, wait, my mother's voice pleaded, now sounding small and terrified. We didn't mean... We can fix this. Let's just talk. We're family. No, I said, the word feeling like the final nail in a coffin. We were family. Now, you're just people who owe me a lot of money and an even bigger apology that I'll never accept. I hung up the phone and blocked every single one of their numbers. For the first time in my adult life, the weight on my shoulders didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a shield. I walked into the kitchen, where Simon was making tea, and for the first time since that horrific afternoon in Austin, I felt like I could actually breathe. The financial ties were severed, the vehicle was back in my driveway, and the wolves were finally realizing that their prey had teeth. Tuesday morning in Austin arrived with a humid, oppressive stillness that felt like the calm before a hurricane. I was parked in a nondescript silver sedan 2 blocks away from the glass and steel monolith that housed the most prestigious real estate firm in Westlake. I wasn't there to confront anyone. I was there to witness the finality of my decision. Detective Vance had called me an hour earlier to confirm that the district attorney had signed off on the felony warrants. In Texas, leaving a child in a hot car isn't just a mistake, it's abandonment or endangerment of a child. And when the evidence includes high-definition video of the suspect checking their makeup while the victim suffers, the system moves with a terrifying, jagged speed. Through the tinted windows of my rental car, I watched as two marked Austin Police Department cruisers and an unmarked black SUV pulled up to the curb. Detective Vance stepped out, her face a mask of professional granite. She didn't go to the back entrance. She walked straight through the front revolving doors, followed by two uniformed officers. I knew exactly what was happening inside. Cassandra would be in the middle of her final internship presentation, surrounded by the wealthy brokers and influential mentors she had spent years trying to impress. She would be talking about market trends and luxury aesthetics, oblivious to the fact that her own aesthetic was about to be defined by a pair of stainless steel handcuffs. 10 minutes later, the doors swung open again. The scene was more satisfying than any financial revenge could ever be. Cassandra was being led out, her arms cinched behind her back, her face a frantic, blotchy mask of red and white. She was shrieking, her voice carrying across the manicured plaza, accusing the officers of harassment and ruining her life. Her classmates and mentors stood behind the glass walls, their faces pressed against the windows in a mix of shock and disgusted fascination. One of the senior partners, a man Cassandra had idolized for months, walked to the door and simply locked it after she was let out, a silent signal that her career in Texas real estate had died before it even began. As they loaded her into the back of the cruiser, Cassandra's eyes scanned the street, landing briefly on my car. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't wave. I just sat there, a ghost in her crumbling world, watching the light bar of the police car flicker against the polished glass of the office building. She had wanted adult conversation and peace during her lunch. Now, she would have plenty of time for silence in a holding cell at the Travis County Jail. But the reckoning wasn't limited to Cassandra. While the cruisers sped away toward downtown, Detective Vance's team was already moving toward my parents' townhouse. I followed at a distance, my heart hammering a cold, steady rhythm against my ribs. By the time I arrived, my mother was standing on the sidewalk in her silk bathrobe, her voice shrill as she argued with an officer who was handing her a subpoena. My father, Arthur, stood in the doorway. His shoulders slumped, the arrogant entitlement he had carried for 40 years seemingly evaporated into the Texas heat. They weren't being arrested. Not yet, but they were being formally charged with hindering apprehension and making a false report to a peace officer. Their desperate attempt to draft a lie for me to sign had backfired spectacularly, because they had already given a recorded statement claiming they had no idea Daisy was in the car, and the dashcam footage clearly showed them discussing her presence before walking into the restaurant. They were now caught in a legal vice. In their attempt to save Cassandra's reputation, they had managed to incinerate their own. "Bridget!" my mother screamed as she spotted me, trying to break past the officer to reach my car. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You're killing your father. You're destroying this family over a grudge. It's just a child. She's fine now. Why are you doing this to us?" I finally stepped out of the car, the heat of the midday sun feeling like a baptism. I walked to the edge of the police tape, looking my mother directly in the eye. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to apologize for my existence. I didn't feel the need to fix her distress. I felt nothing but a vast, clean emptiness. "She's not just a child." "Mom," I said, my voice projecting clearly over her hysterics. "She is my daughter. And you're right about one thing. This family is destroyed. But I didn't do it. You did. You did it every time you chose Cassandra's comfort over Daisy's life. You did it every time you expected me to pay for your silence. The police aren't here because of a grudge. They're here because of the truth. And the truth doesn't care about your anniversary or Cassandra's license." My father looked at me then, his eyes pleading, searching for the good daughter he had manipulated for decades. "Bridget, please. We have no money for a defense. You've locked the accounts. We can't even hire a lawyer to get your sister out on bail. You're leaving us with nothing. You have exactly what you gave Daisy in that car, Dad, I replied, turning back toward my vehicle. You have each other, and you have the consequences of your choices. Figure it out. I drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. The sound of my mother's wailing faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet hum of the air conditioner. The Texas sun was still burning, but for the first time in years, the heat didn't feel oppressive. It felt like justice. The golden child was in a cage of her own making, and the parents who had worshipped her were left standing in the ruins of a life they could no longer afford. The debt was settled. 6 months have passed since the asphalt in Austin felt like it was melting under the weight of my family's betrayal. Today, I am sitting on a wooden porch in a quiet suburb of Seattle, watching the soft, gray mist roll over the evergreen trees. The air here is cool, crisp, and carries the scent of damp earth, a stark, healing contrast to the suffocating 106-degree prison my daughter was left in. Moving halfway across the country wasn't just about a new job opportunity for Simon. It was about putting 2,000 miles of physical space between my child and the people who viewed her life as a minor inconvenience. The legal dust has finally settled, and the consequences in the state of Texas were as cold and unforgiving as the evidence I provided. Cassandra's dream of becoming a high-end real estate mogul didn't just stall, it was incinerated. Because of the dashcam footage and the testimony from Detective Vance, she was forced to take a plea deal for endangering a child with intentional neglect. She avoided a lengthy prison sentence but received 5 years of intense felony probation and a permanent criminal record that effectively blacklisted her from any licensed profession in the state. The Texas Real Estate Commission didn't just deny her application. They issued a lifetime ban. Last I heard, she was working an entry-level data entry job at a warehouse on the outskirts of San Antonio, living in a cramped studio apartment because no reputable landlord in Westlake would touch her with a felony background check. The golden child who couldn't be bothered to miss a brunch is now living a life defined by the very embarrassment she was so desperate to avoid. My parents, Evelyn and Arthur, didn't escape the fallout either. Their attempt to obstruct the investigation and their recorded lies to the police earned them a year of supervised probation and heavy judicial fines. But the real punishment was the financial reality they had ignored for decades. Without my monthly $3,500 rent checks and the unlimited access to my credit cards, their prestige vanished overnight. They were forced to downsize from their townhouse to a small, one-bedroom retirement unit funded by Arthur's meager Social Security. They reached out to me once, 3 months ago, through a lawyer. They didn't ask how Daisy was doing or if she still had nightmares. They asked if I would consider loaning them $10,000 to cover Cassandra's legal fees, citing family unity. I didn't even respond. I simply forwarded the email to my own attorney and instructed him to reiterate the permanent no-contact order. The most important transformation, however, hasn't been the legal wins or the financial shifts. It has been Daisy. For the first few months, she wouldn't let me leave a room without screaming. She had night terrors where she would wake up drenched in sweat, clawing at the air as if she were still trapped behind child-locked doors. We spent countless hours in play therapy, watching her draw pictures of black cars and bright, angry yellow suns. But slowly, the Pacific Northwest air seemed to wash the trauma away. This morning, I watched her playing in the backyard with our new golden retriever. She was laughing, a real, belly-deep laugh that I feared I'd never hear again. She stopped apologizing for being thirsty. She stopped asking if she was being good enough to come inside. In a recent therapy session, the counselor asked her what she remembered about that day in Austin. Daisy looked at me, her eyes clear and steady, and said, "I remember it was hot, but I remember Mommy found me. Mommy always finds me." Those words were the final closure I needed. I spent 32 years believing that my role in life was to be the fixer, the provider, and the stable one for a family that never actually loved me. They only loved what I could do for them. I thought that by paying their bills and tolerating their narcissism, I was being a good daughter. I was wrong. I was just an enabler for their cruelty. It took nearly losing the most precious thing in my world to realize that blood doesn't make a family. Respect, protection, and unconditional love do. The Nelsons, Evelyn, Arthur, and Cassandra are now just names on a legal document to me. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy, and I refuse to give them another second of my life. I feel a profound sense of indifference. They are living the lives they built with their own hands, in the ruins of the bridge they burned. Simon walked out onto the porch now, handing me a cup of coffee and kissing the top of my head. We don't talk about that day anymore. We talk about Daisy's upcoming soccer practice, our plans for the garden, and the quiet peace of our new life. The drama that Cassandra complained about ruined her life, but it saved mine. It forced me to strip away the toxic layers of my past and build a foundation based on truth. To anyone watching this, anyone who is currently being guilt-tripped by toxic relatives or being told to keep the peace at the expense of your own boundaries, listen to me. Peace isn't something you keep, it's something you protect. If the people who are supposed to love you treat your boundaries like obstacles and your children like inconveniences, they don't deserve a seat at your table. I didn't destroy my family. I finally set myself free from a cage I didn't even know I was in. I stood up from the porch swing, adjusted my sweater against the cool breeze, and walked down into the grass to join my daughter. The sun was peeking through the clouds, but it wasn't the predatory, burning sun of Texas. It was soft, gentle, and bright. As Daisy ran toward me, her arms wide open, I knew I had made the right choice. I didn't go too far. I simply went as far as a mother needs to go to ensure her child never has to scream for help again. Justice isn't always a gavel hitting a block in a courtroom. Sometimes, justice is just a quiet house, a happy child, and the absolute silence of a phone that no longer rings with the demands of people who never deserved your heart in the first place. My world didn't end that day in the Austin heat. It began